What's the most ridiculous fact you know? Story 1. If you smell fish and no one's cooking, it's an electrical fire, can confirm. I read this somewhere, so when I started smelling a rather fishy odor that I couldn't tie to anything, I started sniffing various electricals and realized my electronic knitting machine was dangerously overheating, as I would have left it on overnight to avoid losing the place in the pattern. I'm very glad I read that random piece of info somewhere. Story 2. That an ancient king called Mithridates was so scared of being assassinated he drank small amounts of poison every day until he built up an immunity to every poison known to man. When the Romans invaded his kingdom and defeated him, he attempted to poison himself to avoid capture and execution. But because he was so used to the poison, it obviously didn't work. Eventually, a servant killed him with his sword. Story 3. If you stand at the base of the clock tower in London, commonly called Big Ben, with a digital radio tuned to the BBC, you'll hear the sound of the bell striking the hour via the radio before you hear it live. In other words, sound travels faster digitally from the microphone in the tower to the BBC studio to their transmitter to your radio than it does analogically from the bell to you. Story 4. The North American bird population has plummeted by 3 billion breeding adults since the 70s, with devastating losses among birds in every biome. Forests alone have lost 1 billion birds. Grassland bird populations collectively have declined by 53%, or another 720 million birds, all because humans are destroying habitats and using way too many insecticides. Insects are a mainstay of their diet. Story 5. The eruption of Mount Krakatoa was the loudest sound ever recorded. It was heard over 3,000 miles away. Imagine an explosion so big in New York that Los Angeles hears it. It produced seismic ripples through the earth that were picked up on devices and showed that the ripples of the explosion circumnavigated the earth several times. The decibels were so high at the point of the explosion that just the sound was lethal within a few miles. And it is a decibel level that reliquefies solidified concrete. Story 6. The largest single stellar body in the universe that we know of is a ridiculously huge, ultramassive black hole 11 times the size of our entire solar system. It has another black hole bigger than the one in the center of our galaxy orbiting it. The swirl of gases around it shines brighter than the combined light of several thousand galaxies. It is 10 billion light years away. The universe is absolutely bonkers. Story 7. Jerry Parr was the Secret Service agent who grabbed President Ronald Reagan and threw him in the car when John Hinckley shot the president. He covered Reagan with his body on the way to the hospital and is credited with heroically saving Reagan's life. Parr was initially inspired to join the Secret Service by a movie he saw as a boy called Code of the Secret Service, which starred then-young actor Ronald Reagan. Story 8. The horned lizard in general is ridiculous. Its first few lines of defense are normal: camouflage, sharp horns, being faster than smaller prey than the usual defenses. Then it will lift its tail to try and entice a predator to attack that before its head, which they usually will since it has much less armor, so that they can be yeeted away since it's crazy easy to detach. And if all else fails, it'll jam its face into the predator's mouth, hoping it doesn't bite down before firing blood from its eyes that tastes poisonous to freak out the predators and give them time to run away. Story 9. Somewhere in the number pi, there is a section of numbers that are just about you. Your PIN number, credit, and debit card numbers, including start and expiry dates. And those 3 numbers on the back used to confirm you have the card. After that, if you're from the UK, you have your NI number. From the US, you'll find your social security number. After that, if you have a passport, you'll have your ref number, DOB, date of death, and your favorite number. You'll also find your phone number for every phone you ever owned, house numbers to every house you ever lived in, along with how many days you lived in each house. All these numbers and more that you'll recognize, such as favorite lottery numbers or the date you got married, will be listed right next to each other, somewhere in there. Story 10. You don't really touch anything. Your outermost layer of atoms repels everything. The texture of the things you feel is actually the repelling force of the atoms interacting with one another. So when you stand, you levitate. But the space between your feet and the ground is so small and insignificant, you can't see it. Same with various interactions. I'd argue it still counts as touching, especially given the complicated nature of the very small particles, where you can no longer think of them as purely matter or purely a wave. So in that sense, touching something is interacting with it. Even without considering that, what would be the point after which you would consider that 2 atoms are touching each other? 2 electrons touching, 2 nuclei touching. How would you even know they are touching when all you can determine at that point is only a probability? So in my opinion, for all intents and purposes, you can touch stuff. Story 11. Okay, since you asked for it, here are all the most random and worst animal facts I know of. Orcas smack seals up to heights of around 20, 30 feet out of the water, sometimes just because they feel like it. And while I'm at it, crows can remember a person's face for up to 5 years. So if you wrong a crow, they are smart enough to tell their friends and family about it. So one day, you could be messing with a crow, and the next morning, you could wake up to a group of angry crows. A group of crows is also called a murder. Hippos kill more people than every single land predator combined, although the first biggest killer of humans is humans, and the second is domesticated dogs, or at least in the US, I believe. Dolphins play with themselves in fish, which they decapitate beforehand. They assault their owners at aquariums and are smart enough to know about it. Plus, they bully and kill sharks just for fun. Your pets like squeaky toys because it mimics the sound of their dying prey. There is a type of eagle that doesn't care about humans. You could walk right up to it and it wouldn't care, which is why they're endangered. You can't see flamingos' knees since they are covered up by feathers. What you're actually looking at is their ankles. And penguins also have knees, but you can't see them because they are too high up. Hyenas can bite through your leg like we bite through celery. And lastly, look up on Google what an owl looks like without feathers. You're welcome. Story 12. Toy Story 2 nearly got completely deleted, and a single stay-at-home mom saved the movie. When Pixar was working on Toy Story 2, their computers had these pre-programmed commands that would help them with the filmmaking progress. However, one of these commands, RH*, would begin deleting the entire movie until it was all gone. Well, someone accidentally typed RH one day. They had to shut off the power to the entire studio to turn off the computer and try and save the movie. But by the time they were able to turn it off, the majority of the movie was deleted. They honestly thought they were doomed since the movie had to be released in a few months, and there were no backup copies, or so they thought. Turns out one of the animators for the film had a copy of the film at her house because she was given special permission as a single mom with a newborn to work on the movie at home. Needless to say, they took her computer and put it in a car with numerous pillows and bodyguards as they slowly drove to the studio and were able to get her copy of the movie onto their computers and save Toy Story 2. Story 13. In most species of octopuses, yes, this is correct plural, the female will cannibalize the male after mating. Also, there are some species of octopuses in which the male will rip his junk tentacle off after mating with the female octopus. I have way more octopus facts, but these are probably the most interesting to the Reddit crowd. Octopuses can see with their skin. That is how they are able to change colors to match their environment so quickly. They change colors significantly faster than chameleons, faster than a human blink. It takes 20 seconds for a chameleon to change colors. Story 14. The Roman Empire is closer to us in time than the building of the Great Pyramids. Woolly mammoths still lived on Earth when the pyramids were being constructed. The Maori were the first peoples to see icebergs off the coast of Antarctica. Thomas Jefferson funded the Lewis and Clark expedition in large part because he believed that woolly mammoths still roamed the North American plains. Extinction was not an accepted concept at the time, and he had heard tales of mammoths' tusks and bones being found, and wanted sketches. The sun is predominantly green in color. Story 15. There is no significant correlation between cholesterol and heart attacks. The original study was faked. The doctor conducting this study took data from several countries. In the end, he couldn't find a correlation between cholesterol and heart attacks, which was bad because he couldn't sell his medicine. So he just ignored the data that wasn't helping his thesis. In the end, he presented the data from just 7 countries, which indicated a correlation, whereas there would have been none if he included all the data. Story 16. People put stuff up their butts that they shouldn't. There is an entire chapter in the surgical textbook I trained with in residency talking about this and ways to fix it. One of them included an illustration of a lemon up someone's butt, and how you could maybe snare it with a Foley catheter, or how in the event that your patient put a jar of some kind up their butt and conveniently had the opening facing you. Weirdly, no, they tend to put it in mouth of jar first, because they have not read this book, I guess. You can pour in plaster of Paris, for sure readily available in all hospitals, and not just specialty craft stores that aren't open at midnight when these jerks appear, and put a popsicle stick in there. And when it hardens, you pull the jar out like a what the F bloody popsicle that haunts you. I assume it haunts you, because weirdly I have never actually experienced a butt object in 14 years. Yes, fate, bring it on. Story 17. There's a species of ants that keep aphids as livestock. The aphids eat sap that's so sugary that their poop, called honeydew, ends up high in sugar. So the ants defend the aphids and help them find optimal grazing spots. And when the aphids poop, the ants eat it. The ants also have two stomachs, one that actually digests and another that's just for storage. If a full ant finds a hungry ant, the full ant will regurgitate honeydew into the hungry ant's mouth. Story 18. Napoleon Bonaparte was swarmed by a horde of rabbits. Around 1807, after signing the treaties of Tilsit, Napoleon wanted to celebrate with his favorite and disgusting hobby, hunting. He put his chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier, in charge of collecting the necessary game instead of doing it himself. Well, Berthier went overboard and gathered over 3,000 rabbits for the hunt and placed them in cages surrounding the perimeter of the hunting grounds. On the day of the hunt, Napoleon and several military bigwigs called for the cages to be let open, but surprise, the rabbits didn't scurry away. They charged these men and swarmed them, causing outright panic and forcing an all-out retreat. Napoleon himself had to get to his coach and race out of there. It's especially funny, because had Berthier done his job properly, this wouldn't have happened. Rather than hunting down and trapping wild hares, he took the easy way out, ordering his men to procure tame rabbits raised by farmers in nearby towns. These bunnies weren't afraid of people and assumed the military men had their food. Napoleon's greatest defeat was a giant fluffle of bunnies, and that will never not be funny. Story 19. Welcome to the Australian Animal Facts Corner. Wombats do cube-shaped poo. There's a theory it's to make sure it stays where they put it instead of rolling away because they use it for territory marking. Echidna male organ have 4 heads and look like a little pink hand. As I recall, the echidna lady parts has 4 openings, but 3 are dead ends. So the 4-lobed junk hits them all in one go. The extinct thylacine, or Tasmanian tiger, looked like a dog, but was very much a marsupial. Even the males had small vestigial pouches, and the females' pouches faced backwards like a wombat's. Nobody is sure why, but there's a theory it's so it wouldn't snag on branches because they stalked prey through the undergrowth. Best Tassie tiger fact. While they walked on 4 legs, much like dogs, when startled they would rear up on their hind legs and hop away like a kangaroo. The antechinus is a tiny little mouse-like marsupial that's famous for fornicating itself to death. During mating season, the males' bodies get flooded with testosterone, and they pursue mating single-mindedly, with huge numbers dying of starvation and exhaustion. Lyrebirds are one of the world's great animal mimics. They incorporate all kinds of noises around them into their mating songs to impress the ladies. Back before white folks, they'd imitate other bird species' songs. But these days, they also include chainsaws, car alarms, camera shutters, and more. There's a wonderful story about a guy who retired and moved out into a cabin in the forest, where he lived alone and played his flute to entertain himself. The local lyrebirds copied his flute, and then neighboring lyrebirds liked what they heard and stole it. And one day, long after the hermit flutist had died, a friend of his was in a national park hundreds of kilometers away, and he heard a lyrebird singing a flute melody. It was an original piece that his deceased friend had written. Story 20. I didn't think this was too ridiculous, but it got a ton of upvotes in another comment I did a while ago. If you put a few hot dogs in iced water and a few more in hot water, not even boiling, just hot, you can make a pain machine. Just arrange the hot dogs hot, cold, and put your forearm on top of the hot dog arrangement. You will feel a lot of pain as if the hot dogs were boiling hot, but no damage should come to you. It's fascinating to me because each individual hot dog is not hot nor cold enough to hurt, but arranged one and one, they burn like hell. Most Redditors thought this was completely hilarious and weird. Story 21. Typical mass-produced cherries only survive due to helicopters. Cherries are very weak fruits and hang from a very tiny stem. If you look at the top of a cherry where the stem connects is a little indentation. When it rains or these cherry trees are watered, the water pools in those indentations around the stem. The water will eat through the skin of the cherry and get inside, where it will continue to eat away at the cherry, eventually rotting it. To counter this after rain or watering, you have to dry the cherries. Helicopters are the most effective tool for this because they can cover a huge area very quickly, and they don't shake the cherries too much. Shaking individual limbs by hand is too much force and causes cherries to fall off. The rotor wash from a helicopter moving at speed is so subtle that it doesn't cause the cherries to fall off. It only shakes them enough to get the water out of the indentation. So anytime you eat a cherry, you can thank a helicopter. Maybe not. Story 22. So the year is 1700 and something. You are a German farmer coming home from a long day. You sit at the table, eat some sausage and bread, and boom, you're dead. What happened? Well, you got killed by one of the most potent toxins in the world, botulinum. This thing was first discovered in the sausages in Germany, just so you get a feel of how potent this thing is. 1 gram could kill 1 mil people. 300 years later, and we use it to enhance lips and hide wrinkles. I'm talking about Botox. And this is the most ridiculous fact I know. Story 23. In the Greek mythology, Kronos ate his children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. From the second they were born, except Zeus, the youngest, managed to escape and make Kronos swallow a stone, which made him puke out all his children from youngest to oldest. Then Zeus said that their age should not be measured from when they were born, but from when they were puked out by their father. So now instead of Hestia being the oldest and Zeus the youngest, Zeus was the oldest and Hestia the youngest. So if you're the youngest child and don't like it, use this technique instead. Story 24. The black hole. Ton 618 is so large in size that if light passed through its event horizon, it would take a week to reach the singularity. You'll never reach that speed. So if you manage to survive the radiation and heat falling towards it, you wouldn't be killed by the black hole until probably a week or so later, meaning you'd live days knowing what is about to happen. Also, you might die of dehydration or starvation before it has the chance to kill you. Story 25. Humans have the theoretical ability to survive any injury of any nature, given the right circumstances. People have fallen out of planes unharmed, been revived after 6 hours of cardiac arrest, and some have been shot in the brain. The human body is unimaginably tough, and there's still so much we don't know about it. Yet if you sneeze the wrong way, you can suffer a brain aneurysm. If you walk wrong, maybe hit your leg on a curb. You can snap tendons or even your Achilles heel. Scratching your head has the possibility of fracturing your skull. Your appendix is a toxic time bomb of sepsis. Our immune system can potentially become too strong and cause us deficits. Hell, even the possibility of combustion for reasons still unknown. The chances of any of these happening is always possible, but so impossibly low that they shouldn't happen. But they do anyway. Moments that were thought to be so unlikely that they wouldn't happen until the universe dies might happen 6 years later, or less. Ingenuity and probability control is all that caused the human race to become as we are today. Probability is a force that some can learn or improve, but nevertheless, if something is probable or improbable, it will stay that way. Nothing is perfect, but everything can technically work perfectly. You can fall from a bike and break all of your ribs, or get a bike spoke through your knee, or you can fall 2 stories off a zip line onto your back and be perfectly fine. True stories from friends, family, and me. The mere existence of probability is astounding in and of itself. Improbable. Story 26. There are 2 kinds of infinity. Countably infinite. Never-ending but able to be counted. For example, the counting numbers themselves, 1, 2, 3. The general definition is that you can make a one-to-one function between the set and the natural counting numbers. For a cool thought experiment on countable infinity, check out Hilbert's infinite hotel. Uncountably infinite, there is no next increment. This infinity is infinitely bigger than countable infinity. An example would be all of the real numbers between 0 and 1. If you think about it, there is no next biggest number after 0, because any number you give me, I can just divide by 2 and get a smaller one. Infinity isn't actually a number, it's a concept. Story 27. There are individual trees that have grown millions of branches that grow across the globe and are effectively immortal due to humanity's interference. Grafted trees are fun. To put it in an example, the first Braeburn apple tree is still the only Braeburn apple tree in the world. Branches were cut and grafted from the first tree, and those grafts produced more branches that were cut and grafted and on and on. It is still the exact same tree, the exact same DNA, the exact same apple. For those who don't know, grafting is the process of cutting a branch off a tree and attaching it to the trunk of a young tree. The young tree is bred for strong roots and disease resistance, while the grafted branch comes from a tree bred for taste or aesthetic. The combination makes a stronger tree that will always yield the same result. Story 28. The classic TV show Columbo was so popular in Romania when the season ended in 1974, the Romanian people were on the brink of revolt against their government because they didn't believe their government when they said they released all the Columbo episodes in the country, which was true. At that time, Romania had restrictions on the number of TV shows they could import from the U.S. The State Department, had to get Peter Falk to record a speech telling the Romanian people that there really were no more episodes and that they should be peaceful. Story 29. I saw someone comment something similar and I wanted to expand on it. The amount of possible combinations in a deck of 52 cards is an unimaginably huge number. I think it's something like 8 with 67 zeros. Vsauce made a great video about it. Let's start a timer with that number, counting down every second. Stand at the equator, wait a billion years, and then take one step, repeat. After just 14 steps, you are older than the universe. Keep going until you go all the way around the world and back to where you started. Then, take one drop of water from the Pacific Ocean and start your walk again. One step every billion years around the equator. Keep repeating this until the Pacific Ocean is dry. Then, place a piece of paper on the floor, refill the Pacific Ocean, and do it all again, placing another piece of paper on top every time you drain the Pacific Ocean. Keep doing this until the stack of paper reaches the sun. The number won't even be fully gone. So let's pass the rest of the time. Shuffle yourself 5 cards every billion years. If you get an ace, king, queen, jack, 10 of the same mast, carry on. If not, wait a billion years for the next chance. If you carry on, put 1 grain of sand in the Grand Canyon, and then wait until you get the next perfect shuffle. Keep doing this until the Grand Canyon is full of sand, and then take out 1 pound of rock from Mount Everest. Empty out the Grand Canyon, and repeat until Mount Everest is completely flat. The number will almost be gone. Story 30. As far as we can tell, humans have been using boats for over 10,000 years, give or take. Almost 200 years ago, in the 1830s, the Swedish monarchy decided to ensure the future of their shipbuilding industry. They spent a decade planting 300,000 oak trees over 900 acres of land on an island in a lake in the middle of Sweden. They carefully tended to grow almost perfectly straight. This plan was extremely smart and deemed extremely worthwhile because for all of human history, ships had been made of wood, and it was assumed that there was no reason this would change. This was around the same time shipbuilders had started experimenting with the first ships built from iron, and later steel. 50 years later, the entire industry had shifted to metal. Their time and money had been wasted. The trees were never used. They are still there. The island is called Visingsö, if anyone would like to read about it more.